This is the beginning of a series of readings that I never thought I'd actually do. I kept talking about this, thinking about this, but never actually getting around to it. What I'm going to endeavor to do is to read George Orwell's 1984 to you in installments, and we'll see how far we get the first day. My goal is to read the first chapter today. We might not get that far, but I'm going to be reading every day. And why 1984? Well, I think that's pretty obvious. Aren't we living in an age that could be characterized as something akin to the novel 1984? We have increasing state authoritarianism. We have constant wars, war without end, constantly at war with somebody. This has been the case for decades now. And we also have these emergencies, constant emergencies. And COVID-19 is no better example of these emergencies that allow the state to usurp our rights, to take away our freedoms, to force us to do things. And in the process, we are weaker. And this is what 1984 is all about. But it's also about how language has been destroyed, how it has been degraded, how it becomes deteriorated because the state insists that black is white, that night is day, that truth is lies. And this is really what 1984 is about. Now, who is George Orwell? George Orwell, of course, as many of you know, that was his pen name. And although everybody knew him as George Orwell, his real name was Eric Arthur Blair. He was in the Foreign Service for a while in Burma, which was the basis of his novel Burmese Days, which I believe was written about 1933. It was one of his first books, after Down and Out in Paris and London. But he was certainly a man in his short life, and he did not live very long. But he was a prolific writer, not only of novels and journalism, but he wrote columns, column after column after column, and his collected works, amount to about 3 vast volumes, and I've read them all. Now, why do I like George Orwell? Well, I like him because as an author, somebody once said he writes like somebody speaking out loud or thinking out loud, or as somebody would talk to you as if they're telling you a story. And that, of course, is supposed to be the basis, the foundation of journalism. It's supposed to be like telling a story. You tell the most important things first, and it's the inverted pyramid. Anyone who's been to journalism school knows that. And I can tell you that when I went to journalism school, Carleton University, my first year, we were told to read 1984. And, I don't know if I had ever read 1984 until that assignment was given to me. I certainly knew about the book. Everybody knows about the book. Everybody knows 1984 means something sinister. It's this dystopian state of the future, which I think we're fast becoming. But journalism schools in those days at least still believed that journalists should tell the truth and that there was such a thing as objective truth and that George Orwell had something important to say. I doubt very much whether Orwell's on the curriculum today in most journalism schools, even Carleton University, which is supposed to be Canada's best. I don't know if I certainly don't think he's on the Columbia School of Journalism in the United States, which is the equivalent of our Carleton School of Journalism. I doubt very much because journalists today largely are partisan to the point they don't believe in objective truth. They believe in pushing and promoting a certain policy, a certain political idea at the expense sometimes of their own credibility, of their own integrity. And this is what impresses me about George Orwell. I get comments all the time from people who watch my broadcasts or read my columns, and they say, don't you know George Orwell was a socialist? Well, of course I know George Orwell's a socialist. He voted for the Labour Party. Probably the last vote he ever cast was for the Labour Party. But that's what makes him interesting, is because he was a socialist who actually knew and understood the working class. He lived and worked with the working class. Down and Out in Paris and London, as previously mentioned, that book is about Orwell working as a chef and a cleaner at sometimes in restaurants in Paris and London. And describing how fetid the circumstances and the environment is to work in, and getting starvation wages. Even, sometimes he's between jobs, earning nothing. And this is at the height of the Great Depression in Europe, which was as bad, if not worse, than what we experienced in North America and Canada and the United States. Probably worse. So he understood the working class, he understood poverty, and his book, The Road to Wigan Pier, is a classic about poverty. And he visits Welsh miners and he spends time with these families. And he understands their needs. But yet he doesn't emerge from these experiences as some rabid Bolshevik. His socialism is the kind of socialism that says, wouldn't it be nice if people just looked after and treated each other kinder, and if the state looked after the neediest? He's not into the authoritarianism. He's not into pigeonholing people. He's not into classifying everybody into as a widget. He's not into control. And somehow in his early days, he thinks you can achieve socialism without the state being that involved. I'm not saying he's a social anarchist, but he really does believe the state should keep an arm's length, and somehow socialism would just arrive in a timely fashion, and if people would just treat each other in a more equitable manner. And he's a bit naive about this, but at the same time, he's a socialist who's uncomfortable with socialism. He's uncomfortable with socialists who are haranguing people, who are telling people how to live, what to drink, how to drink it, what to eat, how to dress. He already sees that this is what the left is about. It's about controlling everything you think, say, or do, or wear, or eat, or drink, and how you think. He's understanding this very early in his career, that socialism is about, for most people anyway, but not for him, it's about controlling the way people think. And this inevitably and ultimately evolves into 1984. And along the way, of course, he's not comfortable with socialism at many times. He fights as a volunteer in Spain, not for the Stalinist-backed loyalists, and certainly not for the fascists, but for the anarchists, because he understands that Stalin is behind much of the leftist movement in Europe. Stalin is controlling it. The Soviet Union is behind it, and he already sees the Soviet Union as no better than Nazi Germany, as a slave state where they're shoving people into gulags as opposed to concentration camps, but they're the same thing. They're controlling everybody. They're killing people. And it's all about state control. And he's not comfortable with this. So ultimately, just before he dies, he writes 1984. And it's a classic. It remains a classic. And I'll talk about more about this in the future. But he decides the future is bleak if the state is going to be worshipped by the masses. And of course, when he writes this in 1948, Stalin is at the peak of his power. Hitler may be gone, but Stalin is at the peak of his power and is dominating all of Eastern Europe and is threatening the world, and is 1 year away from possession of the atomic bomb. Why did he call it 1984? Well, I alluded to the fact that he wrote the book in 1948. And so what he did was invert the last two numerals of the year he was living in. 1948 became 1984. And that's how the book got its title, which I think is fascinating. And he wrote the book and unfortunately never really saw the huge success it became. He knew it was successful, but he didn't know it was going to be, multi-million seller. and it was going to be something that was on the curriculum of universities the world over, that it was going to be hailed as a modern-day masterpiece, a political treatise that was brilliant. He never saw that because he died in 1950, 46, 47 years of age. Didn't even make 50 years old. Very, very, very sad. But his book lives on, and that's what I want to read today. Because 1984 is where we're at today. And as I read this book, I think it's going to become apparent why 1984 is where we're at today. Because we are living in an age of newspeak. He talks about that. Doublethink. We have governments that literally tell you that black is white in many cases, or that literally will tell you that they are trying to free your speech when they're trying to censor your speech. That euthanasia has something about emboldening and empowering people. We have a liberal government in Canada that is killing people in the name of empowering them. That abortion is somehow a reproductive right and not the murder of the unborn. I could go on and on, but let's let the book speak for itself, shall we? It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. Winston Smith, his chin nuzzled into his breast in an effort to escape the vile wind, slipped quickly through the glass doors of Victory Mansions, though not quickly enough to prevent a swirl of gritty dust from entering along with him. The hallway smelt of boiled cabbage and old rag mats. At one end of it, a colored poster, too large for indoors display, had been tacked to the wall, depicted simply an enormous face, more than a meter wide, the face of a man of about 45, with a heavy black mustache and ruggedly handsome features. Winston made for the stairs. It was no use trying the lift. Even at the best of times, it was seldom working, and at present, the electric current was cut off during the daylight hours. It was part of the economic drive in preparation for Hate Week. The flat was 7 flights up, and Winston, who was 39 and had a varicose ulcer above his right ankle, went slowly, resting several times on the way. On each landing opposite the lift shaft, the poster with the enormous face gazed from the wall. It was one of those pictures which are so contrived that the eyes follow you about when you move. Big Brother is watching you.